What happens when a man who lives for attention walks into a courtroom and mistakes justice for an audience? Before this hearing was over, Judge Caprio would say one sentence so calm, so sharp, and so final that the smile vanished from the young man's face like somebody had cut the power. Drop a comment telling us whether pride always destroys itself, because what happened in Providence that cold February morning didn't just expose a lie. It exposed a whole life built on performance. By 9:14 a.m., everyone in the room would understand exactly who Mason Vale really was. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever seen somebody mistake followers for character, because this story starts with luxury, ego, and a camera pointed in all the wrong directions. Like this video, if you believe respect still matters, even in a world that rewards people for being loud. The courthouse was already packed before the doors opened. Retirees in wool coats sat shoulder to shoulder with delivery drivers in reflective jackets. A nurse still in midnight blue scrubs leaned against the back wall, and two college students whispered into their phones because they had heard an influencer's boyfriend was about to go head-to-head with Judge Frank Caprio. Share this with someone who needs to see what real accountability looks like, because nobody in that room knew they were about to witness a 3-minute collapse that millions would later replay frame by frame. Outside, a white 2024 Mercedes G-Wagon sat illegally half across the loading zone, nose angled toward the curb like even the parking job was trying to make a statement. Its glossy paint reflected the Providence winter sky, hard and silver. A young videographer in a black Moncler jacket leaned on the hood, checking battery levels on two mirrorless cameras. His name was Trent Holloway, 25, Mason's friend, editor, and the guy who usually made reckless behavior look expensive instead of pathetic. Mason Vale walked in at 8:52 a.m. wearing a camel overcoat over a cream cashmere turtleneck, St. Laurent boots, and a watch that caught the fluorescent lights every time he moved his hand. 27 years old, 6'2", gym-built, straight white teeth, dark hair styled like he'd spent longer on it than most people spent on breakfast. He had the face of a man who had never been told no without immediately searching for a camera angle that made him look like the victim. At his side was Sienna Hart, 24, the influencer whose name put bodies in motion. 4.8 million followers across platforms, beauty tutorials, day-in-my-life vlogs, Aspen trips, luxury hauls, skin routines filmed in soft morning light. But that morning she wasn't glowing. She was pale under her designer concealer. Her oversized Celine sunglasses stayed on indoors for nearly a full minute after they entered, which told the room what her trembling mouth didn't. She didn't want to be seen there. "Relax," Mason said to her in a voice low enough to sound intimate but sharp enough to wound. "It's a traffic hearing, not a murder trial." Sienna swallowed. "Then maybe stop acting like you're walking a red carpet." He laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that always sounded like it came with witnesses. "That's what they want. A moment. I'll give them one." 3 rows back, Officer Dana Kessler looked up from her notes and watched him sit. She was 38, a patrol officer with Providence Police. Hair pulled tight beneath her cap, posture straight, jaw set in a way that suggested she had already spent enough time listening to men like Mason explain why rules were for other people. She was not impressed by his coat, his watch, or the little grin he flashed when he noticed people staring. On the opposite side sat Elena Ruiz, 41, left wrist wrapped in a medical brace the color of dirty snow. She wore a navy peacoat over grocery store scrubs and cheap sneakers with cracked soles. Her face was tired in the permanent way of women who work too much and apologize too often. Beside her sat a 10-year-old boy with a dinosaur backpack at his feet and a hand clamped around hers. That was her son, Mateo. He kept glancing at Mason, then at the floor, then back at his mother's brace. 2 benches behind them sat Arthur Bell, 63, former Army mechanic, current school crossing guard, broad-shouldered even in retirement, with a weathered face that looked carved from old oak. He had on a brown Carhartt jacket, a pressed white shirt, and a tie patterned with tiny anchors because his late wife used to say plain ties made him look too severe. His granddaughter Lucy sat beside him in a yellow scarf, knees together, both hands on a folded note card. And in the middle of all of that ordinary, anxious humanity sat Judge Frank Caprio, calm as stone and twice as grounded. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the docket, and called the room to order with the kind of quiet authority that made people lean in without. Realizing they were doing it, no grand performance, no raised voice, just presence, the murmur died, a cough somewhere in the back echoed like a mistake. Next matter, the clerk said. Docket PV 261147, City of Providence versus Mason Vale. Failure to obey traffic control signage, obstruction of a pedestrian crossing, improper parking in a restricted loading zone, and conduct toward an officer arising from incident dated October 14, 2025. Mason stood with a smoothness that was almost rehearsed. "Good morning, Your Honor." The judge looked at him over the top of the file. "Good morning, Mr. Vale." Then Caprio looked toward Sienna. "Ma'am, if you are a witness, please be prepared to remain silent unless addressed." Sienna nodded once. Mason gave the tiniest eye roll. The clerk started to read the initial report. On October 14 at 8:17 a.m., a black Mercedes G-Wagon registered to a holding company connected to Mr. Vale had stopped in a marked no-standing zone on Benefit Street near the corner of Meeting Street in College Hill. Vehicle hazard lights were activated. Driver allegedly remained stationary while a camera operator filmed from the sidewalk. During the stop, a near collision occurred involving a delivery scooter and a pedestrian crossing signal. Officer Kessler issued citations after repeated refusal to move the vehicle. Mason raised his hand before she finished. That got a few whispers in the room. Judge Caprio looked up. "Yes." "With respect," Mason said, already sounding like there would be none. "The way that's being read makes it sound like I caused some disaster. I was stopped for less than 60 seconds. Hazard lights on. My videographer was stepping out with equipment. This is a blown-up parking ticket." The gallery rustled. Elena's fingers tightened around Mateo's. Arthur Bell stared straight ahead. Judge Caprio didn't move. "You'll have an opportunity to speak. Let the clerk finish." Mason smiled the way men do when they want everyone to see how patient they are being with authority they don't recognize. Trent, from the back, subtly angled his phone for a better shot. The clerk continued. Supplementary materials included body camera footage, municipal surveillance from adjacent storefronts, a tow request log, an emergency clinic report, and 2 written victim impact statements. That was when Mason's smile flickered for the first time. Only for a second. Then it came back. Because arrogant people rarely understand danger when it first appears. They think consequences arrive looking dramatic. They don't. Usually they arrive in manila envelopes. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "Mr. Vale, you may respond." Mason took one small step forward like he was approaching a microphone, not a bench. "Thank you, Your Honor. I think context matters. My girlfriend is a public figure. We deal with harassment constantly. We were doing a quick shoot for a winter brand campaign. We stopped for a minute, literally a minute, because the location was crowded and we needed to unload a bag and one lighting case. Officer Kessler came in aggressive from the start. I was respectful. I asked a question. Next thing I know, I'm getting treated like I robbed a bank." Trent smirked. A couple people in the back shook their heads. Mason kept going. "I also think there's a bigger issue here. People see someone successful, someone visible online, and suddenly every interaction becomes a chance to make an example out of them. I'm not saying anyone's lying, but I am saying this whole thing feels exaggerated because of who I am and who I'm dating." That line landed exactly how he wanted it to. Not with sympathy, but with attention. Judge Caprio tilted his head. "And who are you, Mr. Vale?" A soft laugh escaped from somewhere on the left bench. Mason heard it, so did everyone else. He recovered fast. I run a media company, brand consulting, content strategy, talent support. Officer Kessler let out a breath through her nose. Sienna closed her eyes. Judge Caprio said, "Then you understand presentation." "Yes, sir." "Good, this court is interested in substance." That should have been enough warning. It was. Mason's chin lifted. "Then the substance is simple." I stopped briefly. Nobody was hit. Nobody was seriously hurt. If somebody got startled, I'm sorry they felt that way, but the narrative being created here is ridiculous. Elena looked like she had been slapped. Arthur Bell turned his head then, slowly, toward Mason. Lucy stared at him with a child's total, unforgiving honesty. The air in the room shifted. If you've ever watched someone lose a room before they realize it, you know the feeling. It is silent. It is physical. It is the emotional equivalent of ice spreading across glass. Judge Caprio leaned back and opened the file wider. "Mr. Vale, do you maintain that no one was hurt?" "Yes." "And that you were respectful to Officer Kessler?" "Yes." "And that this matter is exaggerated due to your visibility?" "Absolutely." The Judge nodded. "Very well." He looked toward the clerk. "Let's hear from the officer first." Dana Kessler stood, buttoned her uniform jacket, and walked to the witness position with steady steps. Her voice was clean and precise, the voice of someone who had repeated facts enough times to sand away everything but the truth. At approximately 8:17 a.m. on October 14, I was directing morning traffic near Benefit Street due to a utility truck obstruction 1 block east. I observed a black Mercedes G-Wagon stopped in a marked no-standing zone adjacent to a painted pedestrian crosswalk. Hazard lights were activated. The rear passenger door was open into the lane. A camera operator was in the road. The driver, identified as Mr. Mason Vale, was seated behind the wheel. I instructed him to move forward approximately 20 feet into a legal loading area that had just opened. He refused. Mason gave a little shrug like this was administrative trivia. Kessler continued. A delivery scooter traveling south on Benefit swerved wide to avoid the open door and the camera operator. At the same time, a pedestrian crossing group had begun stepping off the curb. The scooter tipped. One rider went down. One child in the crossing group was pulled backward by an adult. I called for medical evaluation. The room got very still. Mason shook his head. "That is not what happened." Judge Caprio didn't look at him. "You'll wait." Officer Kessler did not blink. Mr. Vale exited his vehicle after the fall not to assist, but to object to my language when I told him he had created a hazard. He stated, quote, "Do you have any idea what one post from her can do to your career?" End quote. He then said, quote, "You're lucky we don't make this ugly for you." End quote. A sound moved through the gallery, not loud, worse, disbelief. Sienna's shoulders dropped like she had been carrying that sentence for months. Mason laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "That is absolutely false." Officer Kessler turned to him. "It's on the body cam." Now even Trent stopped smiling. Judge Caprio's face remained unreadable. "Anything further, officer?" "Yes, Your Honor." The scooter rider declined ambulance transport but reported wrist pain and difficulty breathing. The child who was pulled back was visibly distressed. Mr. Vale refused to sign the citation, called the stop "content," and told the camera operator to keep rolling. That last phrase hit differently, "content," because suddenly the whole room could see the shape of it. Not an accident, not a misunderstanding. A moment someone decided was worth filming. Judge Caprio thanked the officer and turned to Mason. "Would you still like to characterize the matter as exaggerated?" Mason crossed his arms. "Yes, because she's blending a lot of little things into a dramatic story. If there's body cam, great, let's see it. Because I know what I said and didn't say." The judge studied him for a beat. "We will." And that was the first cliff, because it sounded like a win to Mason. It was not. The clerk moved to the evidence cart and inserted a flash drive. The monitor angled toward the bench lit up blue. People leaned forward. Even the coughing man in the back straightened. The bailiff shut the side door to block the hallway noise. Somewhere outside, a siren passed and faded, leaving the courtroom in a hush so complete that the click of the keyboard sounded enormous. Before the video played, Judge Caprio looked toward Elena Ruiz. "Ma'am, are you able to testify before we review the recording?" She nodded and rose slowly, careful with her left wrist. Mateo wanted to stand with her, but she whispered something and he stayed on the bench, though he kept one hand hooked into the sleeve of her coat until the fabric stretched. At the witness position, Elena's voice shook at first, not from uncertainty, from having to relive a morning she had spent months trying to get out of her body. "My name is Elena Ruiz. I'm 41. I work for Harbor Home Care. I was on my way to a client on Wickenden Street. I use a scooter because my bus was late and I had to get to work. I came down Benefit and I saw the SUV stop there. I thought the door would close. It didn't. Then I saw a man with a camera stepping backward into the street and I swerved." She looked down at her brace. The scooter slipped on wet paint. My left wrist hit first, then my side. It knocked the breath out of me. I couldn't get up for a second. Mateo was crying quietly now, trying not to make noise. Elena took a breath. What I remember most is hearing someone say, "Did you get that?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Call somebody." Just, "Did you get that?" Several people audibly inhaled. Arthur Bell lowered his head. Judge Caprio asked very gently, "Who said that?" Elena turned, not dramatically, not angrily, just directly. "Him." She pointed at Mason. He threw up his hands. "This is insane. I didn't even know she was hurt." Elena kept speaking as if he had not erupted. "I missed half a week of work. My wrist was in a brace. I still have pain lifting my client who has dementia. I have one son. I don't get paid if I don't go. So when people say nobody got hurt, maybe it's not a hospital story to them. To us, it was rent." That line didn't just land, it sank. Drop a comment telling us if you think the words "to us." It was rent. Say more about real consequences than any legal argument ever could, because the room had stopped seeing Mason as glamorous. Now they were seeing cost. Judge Caprio nodded once. "Thank you, Ms. Ruiz." Then he looked to Arthur Bell. "Mr. Bell." Arthur stood with the deliberate stiffness of a man whose body still carried old service injuries. Lucy rose too, but he gave her a small hand signal, and she sat back down clutching the note card tighter. "My name is Arthur Bell," he said. "I work the crossing at Benefit and Meeting before school. Been there 6 years. That morning I had 4 kids at the curb. One of them was my granddaughter, Lucy. Signal changed. We stepped. Then I saw the scooter jerk and I saw that open door. I grabbed Lucy by her backpack strap and yanked her back hard enough she cried." Lucy rubbed one shoulder just hearing it. Arthur's jaw flexed. Maybe nobody in that SUV noticed. Maybe to them it was fast and funny and nothing happened. But when you've got a child in one hand and a vehicle where it doesn't belong in the other, time gets real slow. You see what could have happened even if it didn't. And let me tell you, Your Honor, sometimes what almost happens stays with a child longer than what does. Judge Caprio glanced toward Lucy. Did she want to say anything? Arthur hesitated. Lucy tugged his sleeve. He looked at the judge. "If the court allows it." Caprio nodded. Lucy Bell stood on the bench because she was too short for anyone to see otherwise. Yellow scarf, missing front tooth, serious eyes. She unfolded the note card with both hands. "My name is Lucy. I'm 9. Grandpa told me I could write it because I get scared talking." The room went soft around her. "After that day, I didn't want to cross the street for a while. I made Grandpa hold my hand even when we weren't on the curb. I know maybe the man in the car didn't mean to scare me, but he looked mad when the lady fell. Not sorry. And I think if grown-ups make mistakes, they should say sorry faster than kids do. There are moments in a courtroom when nobody dares move because truth has entered in a form too small to argue with. This was one of them. Sienna took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red. Mason stared at Lucy like he wanted the room to remember she was a child and maybe therefore dismissible. But children are often the most dangerous witnesses because they haven't yet learned how to decorate what they saw. Judge Caprio thanked her. Lucy sat. Arthur put one hand on her shoulder. Then the judge finally looked back at Mason. "You heard the testimony." Mason cleared his throat. "I heard emotional testimony." The reaction was instant, gasps, a whispered wow. Somebody in the back said, "Unbelievable," loud enough for everyone to hear. Judge Caprio raised one hand and silence returned. Mason kept going because men like him often hear silence as permission. "I'm not saying they didn't feel upset. I'm saying feelings aren't facts. I did not threaten that officer. I did not ask whether footage was captured after someone got hurt. And I definitely didn't do anything that justifies turning this into some character assassination. There are cameras everywhere now. Anybody can cut anything to look bad." Judge Caprio's eyes dropped to the monitor. That was when Sienna spoke for the first time without being addressed. "Mason." It wasn't loud, but it cut through him. He turned. "What?" "Stop." He gave her a warning look. "Sienna, please." She looked away. Everybody in the room felt it. There was history in that one exchange. Control, fear, exhaustion, the private grammar of a relationship turning public. Judge Caprio said, "Mr. Vale, you are concerned about edited footage." "Yes." "Very well, we will start with body cam, continuous recording, no cuts." He nodded to the clerk. The screen flickered, then steadied. Grainy morning light, wind noise, footsteps. Officer Kessler's perspective moving toward the black G-Wagon. The rear passenger door open. Trent in the roadway with a camera rig. Sienna in a cream coat near the curb holding a garment bag. Mason behind the wheel with one arm draped over it, sunglasses on, engine idling. Officer Kessler's recorded voice came through the speakers. "Sir, you can't stop here. Pull forward to the loading zone." Video Mason smiled. "We're 30 seconds, boss." "Not here, move the vehicle." Trent backed farther into the lane, framing Sienna against a brick facade while traffic edged around them. Then it happened fast. A scooter horn, a wobble, a sharp shout. Elena's body twisting sideways out of frame, a child screaming, Arthur's V. Voice raw and loud, "Back, back." The gallery flinched, as if it were happening again. In the video, Mason got out. He did not run to Elena. He did not look to the child first. He turned toward Trent. And clear as church bells in winter, he said, "Did you get that?" Nobody breathed. Officer Kessler's body cam moved toward Elena. "Ma'am, stay down. Don't move your wrist." Then Mason's voice again, irritated now. "This is why people hate this city. Everybody overreacts." Officer Kessler, "Sir, step back." Mason, she clipped herself. Officer Kessler, "You created the obstruction." Mason laughed. "Do you have any idea what one post from her can do to your career?" The courtroom froze. Officer Kessler on the video, "Are you threatening me?" Mason, "I'm educating you." A woman in the gallery covered her mouth. Mateo pressed his face into his mother's sleeve. Sienna shut her eyes so hard it looked painful. On-screen, Officer Kessler said, "License and registration." Mason leaned closer to the camera. "You're lucky we don't make this ugly for you." And then, like one final nail, he turned slightly and muttered to Trent, "Not low enough, not private enough, not hidden enough. Keep rolling. This kind of thing performs." The body cam ended. There was no immediate noise. Just the hum of the heating vent and one person somewhere near the back sniffing hard, as if they had forgotten to breathe until then. Everyone in the room knew. Whatever Mason had built online, whatever brand deals, whatever clean, neutral interiors and luxury morning routines and real-life relationship content he had sold, the man on that screen was not misunderstood. He was documented. Judge Caprio did not speak right away. He let the silence do its work. Then Mason said the worst possible thing. "That's out of context." The room broke. Not chaotically, not with shouting, with disbelief so complete it became sound. Laughter from one corner, a loud "no way," someone else muttering, "He really said that." The bailiff stepped forward. Caprio lifted his hand again and the room quieted, but the temperature had changed forever. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe button because this was only the beginning. Mason thought the worst part was over. It was. The body cam proved what he said. It had not yet proved what he planned. Judge Caprio's voice was almost soft. "Mr. Vale, tell me what context improves that recording." Mason's mouth opened, then closed. He licked his lips. "I was frustrated. It was chaotic." "That makes the words better." "No, but you did not ask if the injured woman was all right." "I assumed the officer had it handled." "You did not go to the child." "I didn't know there was a child involved." Arthur let out a bitter laugh. "You looked right at us." Judge Caprio continued. "You threatened an officer with social media retaliation." "I said something stupid." "You told your cameraman the incident would perform." Mason straightened. "That's how online media works. I wasn't saying I wanted anyone hurt." Judge Caprio leaned in slightly. "But once somebody was, you wanted it captured." Mason said nothing. Then Caprio did something experienced judges do when they know the truth is cornered and trying to find a disguise. He stopped chasing it. "Clerk," he said, "next exhibit." Mason frowned. "What next exhibit?" Rosa Morty lifted another flash drive. Trent looked up sharply for the first time. "What is that?" Officer Kessler didn't even turn around. She knew. The next video was not body cam. It was clean, high-angle storefront surveillance from a boutique across the street. No dramatic body movement, no police perspective, just indifferent truth from above. A fixed camera mounted under a wrought iron awning, time stamp in the corner, 08-17-09. The G-Wagon stopped. Trent stepped into the lane. Sienna posed. Mason remained behind the wheel, window down. Then the real detail emerged. Before the scooter arrived, before Alina swerved, before Lucy screamed, Mason gestured with 2 fingers for Trent to move farther back into the street to widen the shot. There it was, intent. Not a rushed unload, not an accidental pause, a directed setup. Judge Caprio watched the screen without expression. The scooter entered frame. Trent, backing up as instructed, failed to see it. Alina swerved. The open door clipped the scooter handle. She went down. Arthur yanked Lucy backward so sharply her scarf flew off. One of the other children stumbled to his knees. Then, while Alina was still on the ground, Mason checked his reflection in the driver's side mirror. It lasted less than 2 seconds. That made it worse. Gasps scattered across the gallery like dropped glass. Sienna's face drained completely. She looked at Mason as if the person beside her had just become a stranger with a familiar haircut. Mason whispered, "No." Because this surveillance did what body cam did not. It stripped away argument. Body cam gave language. Surveillance gave sequence. And sequence is where liars go to die. Judge Caprio asked, "Mr. Vale, were you still stopped only briefly for unloading?" Mason's ears had gone red. "I mean, yes, but we were framing a shot." "In a crosswalk approach." "It was not in the crosswalk. It obstructed the approach to the crosswalk." "That is arguable." "Not on video." Mason swallowed. "I didn't know he had moved that far." Trent stared at him from the back, furious now, because blame had begun its ugly migration. And then came the first revelation that changed everything. The clerk read from a printed page. Your Honor, Exhibit 7 is a deleted social media story recovered pursuant to preservation request, originally posted from Mr. Vale's account at 8:29 a.m. on October 14 and removed approximately 16 minutes later. Mason spun around. What? Sienna whispered, "Oh my God." Rosa handed the page to the judge, then brought the same image onto the monitor. It was a screenshot of Mason's story, posted just minutes after the incident. Over a freeze frame of Officer Kessler approaching the vehicle, he had typed in bold white letters, "Small city power trip. Watch this cop crash out over 60 seconds." Beneath it was a laughing emoji and a poll sticker reading "Who's wrong?" with options her and also her. The courtroom erupted again. Sienna covered her mouth with both hands. Trent looked at the floor. Officer Kessler did not move, but her jaw hardened so visibly it changed her whole face. Judge Caprio set the paper down very carefully. "Did you post this?" Mason's answer came slower now. "Yes." "And then delete it?" "Yes." "Why?" He glanced at Sienna, then away. "Because it got negative reactions." "From whom?" "People online. People with no stake in the matter understood it faster than you did." That line would later get clipped and shared by thousands because it was more than a rebuke. It was diagnosis. Mason tried one last defense. "Your Honor, this is embarrassing, I know that, but people online joke in real time. That doesn't make me some monster." Judge Caprio's voice stayed level. "No, Mr. Vale, your choices make you that or not." The room went silent again. Quote number 1, and everybody knew it. Sienna stood suddenly. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Mason turned so fast his chair legs scraped. "Sit down." Judge Caprio's eyes locked on him. "You will not instruct anyone in this courtroom except your own conscience, and that appears to be absent today. Ms. Hart, if you have relevant information, you may speak." The entire mood shifted again. Sienna walked to the front with the careful gait of someone holding herself together from the outside, because the inside had already split. She removed her coat and folded it over her arm, exposing a simple black sweater and trembling hands. Her voice was husky from crying she had been swallowing for too long. "My name is Sienna Hart. I was there. I didn't want to do the shoot on that street because the morning traffic was bad and people were already staring. Mason said it would be fast. He said controversy boosts reach." Mason whispered, "Sienna." She kept going. "After the woman fell, I told him to get out and help. He said, if she's standing in 30 seconds, we're fine. Then when the officer came over, he smiled because he thought it would make a good clip. He always thought conflict made good clips." A collective murmur ran through the room. This was not just a girlfriend contradicting him. This was an accomplice stepping out of the fog. Sienna's eyes filled. "When we got home, I told him to delete the story. He said the hate would pass and engagement was engagement. I told him a child got scared. He said, nobody remembers kids in street stories. They remember villains." Even Judge Caprio looked taken aback by that one. Mason was whispering under his breath now, furious and panicked. "You're twisting this. You're emotional. You know how this works." Sienna turned to face him fully. "That's the problem, I do." She looked back at the judge. "I'm not innocent here. I stayed with him. I filmed with him. I let him treat everything like content, even when it stopped being funny a long time ago. But he said those things, all of them." The room felt electric. Like this video, if you believe the truth hits hardest when it comes from the one person who has protected you the longest, because Sienna's voice didn't sound vindictive. It sounded exhausted, and that made it devastating. Judge Caprio thanked her. She did not return to Mason's side. She sat alone on the last bench, 2 full rows behind him. That visual told its own story. Then the judge asked a question nobody expected. "Mr. Vale, what do you do when there is no camera?" Mason blinked. What? When there is no camera, no audience, no comments, no brand manager, who are you when there is nothing to perform for? Mason looked lost for the first time all morning. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. Because arrogant people usually prepare for attack. They do not prepare for inquiry. Judge Caprio turned another page. The court also has a letter from Ms. Ruiz's employer confirming missed work shifts, a clinic report documenting a sprain and rib contusion, and a note from the school counselor regarding Lucy Bell's temporary anxiety around street crossings. These are not feelings floating in the air, Mr. Vale. These are consequences with names. He set the papers down, and the sound echoed like a gavel. Quote number 2. Mason's throat moved. I said I was sorry if people felt. Judge Caprio stopped him without raising his voice. No, you do not apologize for people's feelings when your conduct created the facts. Quote number 3. Somewhere in the back somebody whispered, say that again. If you've made it this far, share this with someone who still thinks accountability is cancel culture, because what happened next was not mob justice. It was the disciplined unveiling of truth. The judge invited Mason to answer one direct question. Did you understand, while sitting in that vehicle, that you were in a place where stopping could endanger pedestrians? Mason hesitated too long. Yes, he said finally. That one word changed the legal and moral center of the hearing. Because now the negligence was conscious. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. And you remained there because the shot mattered more. No, that's not fair. Then why did you remain? Mason looked toward Trent, toward Sienna, toward the monitor, anywhere but the bench. Because I thought we'd be quick. Judge Caprio waited. Mason's shoulders dipped. Because I didn't think it was a big deal. There, Caprio said quietly. Now we are finally close to the truth. He paused. The most dangerous people in a city are not always the angry ones. Sometimes they are the comfortable ones. The ones who believe inconvenience to others is the price of their own importance. Quote number 4. The room didn't just hear that, it absorbed it. Mason's confidence was gone now, but something uglier remained beneath it, the reflex to protect self-image at all costs. So what? You want me to say I was selfish? Fine, I was selfish. I made a stupid decision. People make mistakes. Are we done? The words slammed into the room like another offense. Judge Caprio sat forward. You are still negotiating with reality as if this were a press statement. Then he did something nobody expected. He asked the bailiff to bring in Exhibit 10. Leon Briggs, broad as a doorway and calm as old furniture, carried a thin cardboard box to the front. Inside were not electronics, not more reports, personal items in clear evidence bags. A child's yellow scarf, Elena Ruiz's cracked scooter mirror, and a printed photograph taken that morning by a bystander, close enough to show Elena on the pavement with one hand on her ribs, while Mason stood 5 feet away looking at his phone. The gallery went dead silent. Judge Caprio didn't need to dramatize it. The objects did that themselves. Sometimes, he said, when numbers and statutes fail to penetrate ego, simple things help. A scarf, a mirror, a wrist brace. Evidence does not shout, it waits. Quote number 5. Mason's eyes fixed on the scarf. Lucy Bell stared back at him without blinking. That was the moment the first crack appeared that had nothing to do with public image. It had to do with shame. Not enough shame yet, but real. Judge Caprio asked Lucy if the scarf was hers. She nodded. Would you like it back? She glanced at her grandfather, then said very softly, not from him. Nobody in the room would ever forget that line. Mason looked like he had been punched in the chest. And still there was more. Rosa handed the judge a final printed email chain. Your Honor, these are communications voluntarily submitted by Heart Beauty Collective through counsel. Sienna went rigid. Mason turned toward her with panic flooding his face. "What did you do?" Judge Caprio scanned the page. This appears to be correspondence from a brand partnership manager dated October 15, the day after the incident. The manager asks whether Mr. Vale's involvement in Ms. Hart's content exposes the brand to reputational harm due to what they call reckless public conduct captured on multiple recordings. Mason whispered, "No." Caprio looked up. "Mr. Vale, are you aware that Ms. Hart lost a six-figure winter campaign because the retailer declined to continue any placement featuring you after reviewing the footage?" Sienna closed her eyes. Tears slid down both cheeks. The room shifted again. The victims had multiplied. Not just Alina, not just Lucy, not just Officer Kessler, not even just the public space he treated like a stage. Now there was Sienna, whose career had been hit by the blast radius of his ego. Mason turned around fully. "Why didn't you tell me that?" Sienna laughed through tears, and it was one of the saddest sounds in the room. "I did. You said they were boring and we had bigger opportunities." He stared at H. Stunned. Because for the first time, he was not looking at her as a prop, or a brand, or a shield. He was looking at damage he had done to someone who had once tried to protect him from himself. The judge let that sit. Then he said, "Mr. Vale, you entered this courtroom believing you were being targeted because of visibility. The evidence suggests the opposite. Visibility merely ensured your conduct could not hide." That line would become the quote most people remembered, because it turned the whole premise inside out. By then it was 9:13 a.m. At 9:14, everything broke. The clerk asked if the court wished to review the final surveillance clip. Judge Caprio said yes. This footage came from a coffee shop doorbell camera half a block down, taken after the citations were issued. There was no audio, but there didn't need to be. Mason stood on the sidewalk gesturing aggressively while Sienna held her phone to her chest. Trent hovered nearby. Alina was seated on the curb with Officer Kessler. Arthur kept the children back. Then, with perfect visibility, Mason reached out and took Sienna's phone from her hand. Not violently, but possessively, controlling. He checked the screen, typed something, handed it back, and pointed toward the car. Sienna, on the witness bench earlier, had said she wanted the story deleted. Now the implication was obvious. He had not just minimized the harm, he had managed the narrative. Judge Caprio asked one question. "Ms. Hart, was that the moment you tried to remove the story?" Sienna nodded without speaking. "And Mr. Vale took your phone?" Another nod. The room understood, so did Mason. All the smart, polished language drained out of him. "I was trying to stop her from posting while we were in a legal situation." Judge Caprio didn't buy it. Nobody did. "You were protecting yourself," he said. Mason's hand started to shake, small at first, then visibly. This was the 3-minute destruction people would later talk about. From 9:14 to 9:17, every layer he had built, successful boyfriend, polished operator, misunderstood public figure, strategic content man, was stripped by footage, testimony, and his own voice. Not with screaming, not with humiliation for sport, with proof. The clerk read the municipal code sections. The judge summarized the findings. The city had clear signage. The officer had given lawful direction. The defendant knowingly remained in a restricted area for personal content creation. A pedestrian hazard resulted. Injury resulted. Intimidation of an officer occurred. Post-incident conduct showed ridicule rather than remorse. Additional harm extended to commercial and personal associates. You could see the words hitting Mason physically. He sat down because his knees no longer trusted him. Then Judge Caprio asked the question that turned collapse into choice. "Mr. Vale, do you wish to continue challenging the facts, or are you prepared finally to tell the truth?" Mason stared at the floor, no answer. Caprio waited. The room waited with him. No phones up now. No whispers. Not even Trent filming. This was bigger than viral at that moment. This was the terrible intimacy of a person coming face to face with himself in public. Mason's voice, when it came, was smaller than anyone had heard yet. I didn't think it mattered. He swallowed hard. That's the truth. I thought we were important enough for people to go around us. I thought 1 minute of our shoot mattered more than everybody else's morning. When she fell, I wanted it to be her fault, because if it was my fault, then I was the kind of person everybody in here now thinks I am. Caprio asked, and are you? Mason closed his eyes. I was that person. Not redemption, not yet, but the door opened. He rubbed both hands over his face. I said those things to the officer. I posted the story. I told Trent to keep filming. I was angry because I thought being corrected in public made me look small, so I acted worse to feel big again. Nobody moved. Then he turned slowly toward Alina. I am sorry. She did not answer. He turned toward Arthur and Lucy. I am sorry. Arthur's face did not change. Lucy leaned against her grandfather and looked away. He turned toward Sienna, but the words died in his throat because whatever apology belonged there was far more private than the room allowed. Judge Caprio folded his hands again. Truth is a beginning, Mr. Vale, not a sentence reduction. That was another line people would quote for weeks. And right there, around the point when most stories would rush toward punishment, this one deepened instead. Because the judge did not immediately rule. Instead, he asked Alina Ruiz a question. Ms. Ruiz, if this court were to prioritize accountability over spectacle, what would justice look like to you? Alina seemed caught off guard. She looked at her son, then at her brace, then back at the bench. I want my wages covered, she said, and my clinic bill, and I want him to understand that so. Me people can't afford his type of mistake. Judge Caprio nodded, fair. Then he turned to Arthur Bell. Mr. Bell. Arthur took longer. I don't need him ruined, I need him changed. The whole room absorbed that. Arthur continued, voice low and controlled. There's too much ruining already. Online especially. Everybody wants a head on a stick for one clip. But if you ask me, Your Honor, jail would make him a martyr in his own mind. A fine alone would make this a bill. He needs work. Real work. The kind cameras can't dress up. Judge Caprio's eyes sharpened with interest. What kind of work? Arthur looked directly at Mason. Let him stand where I stand. Let him help children cross in weather he can't style. Let him sit in the trauma wing and listen to people whose mornings were changed for life. Let him spend enough hours around ordinary consequence that he stops thinking inconvenience is an attack. That was the unexpected compassion moment, and it hit harder than anger ever could. Because mercy from a victim does something punishment alone cannot. It removes every excuse. Mason started crying then, not cinematic crying, not neat, his face twisted. His shoulders shook once, twice, like he hated himself for it. He covered his mouth, but the sound came out anyway. It wasn't pity that moved through the room. It was recognition. The recognition that shame had finally made it past his mouth and into his bones. Judge Caprio let him cry. Then he said, Mr. Vale, listen carefully. The law does not care how many followers you have. A city cannot function if vanity claims a right of way. You endangered people. You mocked the injured. You threatened a police officer. And worst of all, you treated human beings as background to your own image. He paused. But mercy is not the opposite of justice. It is what makes justice human. Every pen in the room stopped. Every eye stayed fixed on him. I am finding you responsible on the cited violations and referring the officer intimidation finding for formal notation. I am also ordering restitution to Ms. Ruiz for documented lost wages and medical costs. In addition, because this court will not contribute to your mythology by pretending humiliation is transformation, I am suspending the maximum financial penalty on one condition." Mason looked up, crying openly now. "You will complete 300 hours of supervised community service, 100 hours with pedestrian safety support through the city, 100 hours with a rehabilitation clinic serving accident patients, 100 hours in a youth digital literacy program where you will speak truthfully about what happens when image replaces conscience. You will appear back in this court in 90 days with written verification." The room exhaled. Judge Caprio wasn't done. "You will also provide within 14 days a written apology to Officer Kessler, Ms. Ruiz, Mr. Bell, and Miss Bell. Not a statement drafted by counsel, not a caption. Your words, your handwriting." Mason nodded rapidly, tears dropping to the front of his turtleneck. "And one more thing," Caprio said. Everyone leaned in. "You may post about this if you choose, but if you turn your consequences into content, I will know that no lesson was learned, and I will revisit every available sanction with enthusiasm." Laughter broke out then, shocked and relieved. Even Officer Kessler smiled once. Mason whispered, "I understand." "No," Judge Caprio said, "you are beginning to." There it was. The ultimate confrontation resolved not with theatrical destruction, but with disciplined moral force. If you believe that line should be printed in every courtroom, like this video, because the room had just watched something rare, authority powerful enough to punish and wise enough to aim beyond punishment. Most viral clips end there, this one didn't. Because outside the courtroom, the world was already catching up. By 10:03 a.m., someone who had been sitting in the second row uploaded a 42-second clip of Judge Caprio saying, "Visibility merely ensured your conduct could not hide." By noon, it had over 2 million views. By 3:00 p.m., the bodycam excerpt was all over commentary accounts. By evening, Mason's name trended for the worst reason possible. Not scandal exactly, but exposure. People weren't outraged because he was rich or well-dressed or connected to an influencer. They were outraged because the footage was so familiar. Everyone had met a version of him. The guy who thinks rules are optional when his schedule matters more. Brand blogs picked it up first, then reaction channels, then local news, then national clips. Influencer's boyfriend humbled in court. Judge dismantles ego with one sentence. The 3-minute collapse everybody's talking about. The thumbnails were brutal. Mason froze in mid-smirk beside Lucy's scarf in an evidence bag. Trent Holloway texted him once that afternoon, "Bro, I'm not taking calls." Then Trent publicly resigned from Mason's med. "I company by midnight." Sienna did not post for 6 days. On day 7, she uploaded a video with no makeup, no sponsor tags, no music. Just a static camera and her face. She did not cry. She did not perform devastation. She simply told her audience she had spent too long confusing chemistry with character and too long allowing aesthetic softness to hide moral ugliness. She announced she was donating the equivalent of the Lost campaign to a Providence pedestrian safety initiative and said she would not feature Mason on her platforms again. That clip did 8 million views in 48 hours. But the twist nobody saw coming was what happened on day 9. Instead of posting a rebuttal, a "my side," or a manipulated montage, Mason disappeared. No stories, no podcast appearance, no misunderstood men circuit, no lawyer statement beyond confirmation of compliance. His accounts went dark. For a man who had once measured worth by engagement, the silence was almost impossible to believe. People said it wouldn't last. People were wrong. The first week of community service nearly broke him. Providence in March is wet cold, the kind that climbs inside your sleeves. Mason reported at 6:45 a.m. to a school crossing program on the east side wearing brand new waterproof boots and a black puffer that cost more than some families' groceries for a month. Arthur Bell was there waiting, reflective vest over his coat, holding an extra pair of city-issued gloves. "Those boots are cute," Arthur said. "You'll still freeze." Mason took the gloves without arguing. For 4 hours each morning he stood at curbs. He held stop signs. He watched parents run late. He watched children skip, cry, drag backpacks, clutch lunchboxes, spill hot chocolate, and trust adults to make the street safe. He watched drivers stare at phones. He watched buses take corners too wide. He watched what a crosswalk really means when you are responsible for flesh instead of footage. On his third morning, Lucy Bell approached him with the solemnity of a tiny judge. "Grandpa said I don't have to forgive you fast," she said. Mason nodded. "He's right." She studied him. "You look different without trying." Then she walked away. That line stayed with him all day. At the rehabilitation clinic, things got harder. The director was Dr. Priya Natarajan, 46, trauma rehab specialist, steel gray streak in her hair, no patience for vanity. On Mason's first shift, she handed him a stack of sanitized linens and said, "You are not here for absolution. You are here for usefulness." He cleaned wheelchairs. He restocked cabinets. He wheeled patients to occupational therapy. He sat in waiting rooms where time moved like guilt. He listened to stories nobody monetized. A cyclist with a reconstructed hip after a distracted driver swung into a bike lane. A food courier with a shattered ankle from a delivery truck door. A college sophomore whose wrist never regained full mobility after being clipped in a crosswalk. No one cared who he had dated. No one cared what watch he wore. People cared whether he brought water fast enough, whether he remembered which room needed extra blankets, whether he listened without interrupting. That is where humiliation, finally, gave way to humility. Around week 4, Dr. Natarajan found him sitting alone in a supply room, elbows on knees, crying quietly into his city-issued gloves. "What is this?" she asked. He laughed once through his tears. "I thought I was a good person with a bad moment. And now," he wiped his face, "now I think I was a bad habit in expensive shoes." She considered that. "Closer, but don't make self-hatred another performance. Learn, then serve." He nodded. At the youth digital literacy program, he faced the audience he once understood best: teenagers. Not fans, not followers, teenagers. They were harder than judges. The first school was a public middle school in Pawtucket. 80 students in a multi-purpose room, plastic chairs, bad mic, basketball lines on the floor. The counselor introduced him plainly. "This is Mason Vale. He is here because his decisions online and in public caused harm, and he has agreed to speak honestly about that." A boy in the front row immediately said, "Wait, are you the guy Judge Caprio cooked?" The room burst into laughter. Mason inhaled, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm that guy." That honesty changed the air. He told them what it felt like to confuse attention with respect. He told them that filming your life slowly teaches you to value what looks dramatic over what is actually right. He told them the internet rewards certainty and punishes reflection, so people get addicted to doubling down even when they know they're wrong. He told them the sentence that would later be quoted in 100 school newsletters: "If your first instinct after someone gets hurt is to check the footage, you are already in danger." The students got quiet. Afterward, a 13-year-old girl waited until everyone else had left and said, "My brother posts fights from school because he says that's what gets views. Can I show him your video?" Mason nodded. "Show him the court one too." That was the breakthrough. Not big, not flashy, real. Still, redemption never moves in a straight line. Around day 58, one of Mason's old friends leaked a group chat to a gossip page. In the messages, written weeks before the hearing, Mason had joked that Caprio was a sentimental old TV judge for parking tickets and said he'd walk out with a better clip than the court. The screenshots went viral immediately. Comment sections exploded. People said he had learned nothing. They said the tears were fake. They said the service was reputation laundering. This was but wait, there's more twist that could have ended any fragile recovery. Reporters called the courthouse. Commentary accounts reposted the leak beside the body cam footage. Sienna's followers demanded she speak again. Mason's probation supervisor asked for an updated reflection statement. Everything threatened to collapse back into spectacle. But this time, something different happened. Mason did not deny the messages. He did not say they were taken out of context. He did not post a black screen with small white text about growth and accountability. He asked for permission to address it at his next required appearance before Judge Caprio. When the 90-day review arrived, the courtroom was fuller than the first time. Not because people wanted more humiliation. Because now they wanted to know whether change was real. On May 19, 2026 at 9:00 a.m. the same room filled again. Same benches, same heating vent hum, same clerk, same bailiff, same judge. But Mason Vale looked like a different species of man. No overcoat, no luxury boots. Navy suit off the rack, tie slightly crooked, hair shorter, no watch at all. His face was leaner, his posture less curated. He carried a folder worn soft at the edges from being opened too often. Sienna came too, but sat by herself again. Elena Ruiz was there. Arthur and Lucy were there. Officer Kessler stood near the aisle. Dr. Natarajan took a seat in the back. Even Trent appeared, unshaven and uncomfortable, as if curiosity had overridden shame. Judge Caprio reviewed the service verification. Completed hours. Restitution paid in full. Letters submitted. Supervisor notes favorable. One attachment from the youth program describing Mason as consistent, punctual, and honest to a degree students recognized. Another from Dr. Natarajan. He stopped narrating himself around week 3. That drew a small smile from the judge. Then Caprio looked up. Mr. Vale, before I say anything further, I understand there are newly surfaced messages you wish to address. Mason nodded. Yes, Your Honor. He stepped forward and unfolded a single sheet of paper, not to read a crafted statement, just to keep his hands from shaking. I wrote those messages. They were arrogant and stupid and cruel. They were proof that even while I was walking into court the first time, I still believed consequences were a game I could out-tangle. When those texts came out, part of me wanted to say they didn't reflect who I am anymore. But the truth is, they did reflect who I was. Recently. Not 10 years ago, not before I knew better, recently. He looked at Lucy, then Elena, then Officer Kessler. So I'm not here to ask anyone to update my image. I'm here to say the leaked messages don't erase the work, but they do explain why the work was necessary. I was not one bad moment. I was a pattern. No one in the room moved. And I know a lot of people think I only changed because I got caught. They're partly right. Getting caught was the first honest thing that happened to me in a long time, but what happened after that? Standing in weather with kids, sitting in rehab rooms, hearing what carelessness costs. That changed me in a way being exposed never could. Exposure can embarrass you. Service can remake you, if you let it. Judge Caprio listened with his chin, resting lightly on one hand. Then he asked the question that mattered most. And if no one ever believed you changed? Mason answered without pause, I'd still owe the work. That was when Arthur Bell nodded for the first time. The judge then invited any interested party to comment on compliance. Elena Ruiz stood. My wrist still hurts when it rains, she said. That part doesn't change because somebody learns a lesson, but he paid what he owed. He wrote to my son too, not because the court ordered it, because Mateo kept asking if the man knew our names. Now he does. Mateo, sitting beside her this time in a fresh button-down, stared straight at Mason and gave one stiff little nod. Officer Kessler spoke next. He wrote an apology without excuses. That matters, not enough by itself, but it matters. Then, unexpectedly, Sienna rose. The room tensed. because there are some people whose presence carries a whole second story inside the first one. She faced the judge. I'm not here to endorse him. Our relationship ended after the hearing. It needed to. But I want the court to know that since then, he has never once asked me to post on his behalf, soften public opinion, or help him re-enter content spaces. He stayed away from my platforms completely. For someone like Mason, that is not a small thing. Judge Caprio nodded. Thank you, Ms. Hart. Then Lucy raised her hand. The room almost smiled at the formality of it. Caprio smiled openly this time. Yes, Miss Bell. Lucy stood with another note card, though this one was smaller. I wrote less this time, she said. A few people laughed softly. She read, I still remember being scared, but Grandpa says brave people are not people who never do bad things. They are people who stop lying after they do them. I don't know if he's all the way brave yet, but he's more brave than before. That was it. The judge removed his glasses, polished them once with a handkerchief, and looked at Mason with something like stern kindness. Mr. Vale, courts see many kinds of defendants, the defiant, the frightened, the unlucky, the dishonest. Occasionally we see the revealed, people whose real punishment is not the fine but the moment they can no longer avoid themselves. You came here the first time believing a courtroom was just another set. It was not, and the city you treated like scenery reminded you of that. He placed his glasses back on. You have complied with this court's orders. More importantly, credible people tell me you have begun to understand why the orders existed. Do not waste that. There are men who spend entire lives protected from self-knowledge. You were spared that curse. The room was motionless. Then Caprio added the line that would end up on quote pages, motivational reels, and law school bulletin boards for months. Clout is rented. Character is owned. Pay attention to what remains when the lights go out. No one forgot it. The matter was closed. Most stories end there. This one didn't, because transformation only matters if it survives ordinary time. 6 months later, in November, a letter arrived at the court in thick cream paper with no logo on it. Handwritten. 3 pages. Judge Caprio's clerk made a copy for the file because the judge said some letters deserved preserving. Mason wrote that he had taken a full-time operations role at a nonprofit mobility and pedestrian safety organization in Rhode Island. Modest salary. No on-camera duties. He wrote that every week he still volunteered one early morning at school crossings because service done once can still be vanity. Service repeated becomes habit. He wrote that he had sold the G-Wagon and used part of the money to fund reflective backpack covers for elementary students in 3 Providence schools. No press release. No branded donation wall. He wrote that Dr. Natarajan still corrected him when his apologies grew too eloquent. He wrote that Alina Ruiz had agreed, after months, to let him help organize a fundraiser for home care workers injured on the job. He wrote that Mateo now teased him about his terrible coffee order choices. He also wrote about Sienna. Not romantically, respectfully. He said the hardest part of change was accepting that the people harmed by your old self are not required to witness your new one. He wrote that he no longer considered that unfair. He considered it part of the debt. Some doors, he wrote, must stay closed so the lesson can stay open. That letter was not public at first. But stories leak, and good ones deserve to. By January, a local paper ran a feature on Providence's school crossing program and mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that one of its volunteers was a former viral defendant whose court-ordered service became long-term civic work. People recognized him from a candid photo in a reflective vest holding a stop sign while snow gathered on his shoulders. No luxury coat, no performance smile, just cold breath and focus. The comments were different now. Not everyone forgave him. They didn't need to. But many people said the same thing. This is what accountability should look like. Not disappearance, not branding, not empty language. Repair, time, repetition, witness. And maybe that is why the original clip never really died. Not because a young man got humbled. The internet has plenty of those. It lasted because the story became larger than humiliation. It became a rare modern fable about evidence, ego, mercy, and the difficult work of becoming somebody worth believing after you have given people every reason not to. People still replay the exact 3 minutes that ended Mason Vale's career as it used to exist. They pause on the smirk. They quote Judge Caprio. They point to the scarf in the evidence bag. They say, right there, that's the moment he knew. But the real moment may have come later. Colder, quieter, no cameras. A curb at 7:03 a.m. A line of children in puffy coats waiting for an adult to take the street seriously. And a man once obsessed with being seen choosing, for once, to simply be useful. That's harder, that's better, that lasts. Because here's the truth nobody tells people who build identities around applause. Public approval can hide rot for a long time. Nice lighting can hide emptiness. A luxury car can hide smallness. An audience can hide cowardice. But the second harm enters the frame, the soul of a person becomes visible very quickly. Not eventually, quickly. In the first words out of their mouth, in where their eyes go, in whether they reach for help or for the camera. Mason reached for the camera. Judge Caprio made him look at the people. And that changed everything. There's one more part of the story that almost no reaction channel mentioned, but maybe it matters most. Near the end of that school year, Lucy Bell had a class assignment to write about a person who taught her something surprising. She did not write about her grandfather, though Arthur pretended to be offended. She did not write about Judge Caprio, though she drew a little pair of glasses in the margin. She wrote about the man from court. She wrote that he taught her bad grown-ups do not become good because everyone yells at them. Sometimes they become better because someone finally makes them stop talking long enough to hear themselves. That is a child's sentence. And it may be wiser than most adult commentary. So when people ask whether Judge Caprio destroyed Mason Vale's career in 3 minutes, the answer is yes and no. He destroyed the career built on arrogance, intimidation, and the belief that public life was a game without weight. That version did die in 3 minutes. It deserved to, but what replaced it was not destruction. It was exposure followed by a choice. And choices, repeated long enough, become a different life. That is why this story still hits. It gives you outrage early, the threat to the officer, the woman on the pavement, the child nearly pulled into danger, the smugness, the post, the laugh, all of it makes your blood rise. Then it gives you shock, the footage, the deleted story, the girlfriend telling the truth, the brand deal lost, the realization that harm spreads farther than the original impact. Then it gives you satisfaction, the judge's calm dismantling, the quotes nobody can argue with, the silence after the lies collapse. Then, just when you think you've gotten what you came for, it gives you something rarer,